There we go. All right. Welcome to the Deal Doctor live stream. It's 1 o'clock on Monday. And today we've got special guest Kim Anderson to join Eric Graham and myself. And today we're going to go through some of the changes on the West Michigan regional forms. I just loaded up a few minutes ago this document. It's a PDF. I loaded it into 5-Star Connect forms files so that you can pull it up, follow along, or pull it up later, print it, download it, and have it handy so you can review it. But today we're going to use a different method. We're going to walk through this, and I'm going to let Kim introduce the purchase agreement, and then we're going to walk through and discuss each and every step. So without further ado.
All right, I am going to, hi everybody, happy Monday. All right, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So this is, and everyone should have got this. I believe your board sent out all these. I love these. They're in, they check through the red, and the blue is going to be the new language. So here's your purchase agreement. Don, are you starting?
Go ahead. Start
Okay.
with that first one there.
Yeah. So number 2, pretty easy regarding agency disclosure. Instead of saying check one, it's saying choose one. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Any thoughts on that? It's just, I'm not sure too big of a difference, right?
No, and as we've talked many times about, it's usually best to not choose dual agent unless you're in some very unusual circumstances. But no, moving on. Let's
Okay. All right. So let's scroll all the way down, and now we are on seller financing. Once again, they remove check, and it now says choose. So and the same with equity, minor changes. Any thoughts on that? It's pretty straightforward. Okay. And then number 9, contingencies. Once again, instead of saying check one, it's saying choose one. So nothing else on contingencies. Let me see. And that has not changed at all. That's exactly the same. Any thoughts? Okay.
No. Pretty straight.
Pretty straightforward. All right. So now this one's interesting. Number 14, it's saying to choose one. So it used to be we automatically defaulted to the seller, right? And they've added you can choose seller or buyer. So what's your thoughts on that one?
I think this is really important. This is probably one of the most important changes on the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement, because there was a great deal of confusion in their last attempt to clarify. I think they made it more confusing by this language that you see has been struck through the red language. And because it talks about if there's governmental protocols, blah, blah, blah. It made it really confusing. Here it's really clear. Who's going to pay for it, buyer or seller, and what are their options once it's done? I think it's really helped to clarify, so there's not that argument about whether the township or the municipality requires it, the county. It doesn't matter. It's either the buyer's going to pay for it, the seller's going to pay for it, and here are their options if it's not acceptable. Eric?
Yep.
Yeah, the only issue that they don't address is pumping up the tanks.
Right, but we typically, what it says here, the inspection will be performed by a qualified inspector, and usually they'll recommend it if the inspection comes back, right?
So this will come into the second part that if any report discloses a condition unsatisfactory to the buyer, then they can request having that done. But we probably wouldn't just encourage that. If you're going to have either the seller or the buyer pay for those, you might as well put in there to have the seller pump the tanks if it's required per the inspection report, because it might not be required.
Right, that's a good idea. And what are we seeing in this market? Typically, though, if a buyer's trying to write a strong offer, they're going to offer to pay it, right? They're going to probably offer to pay for that well and septic inspection.
Yes,
so,
and even in some cases the pumping, but I think the thing to keep in mind is that the words matter. And so if you are going to require that it be pumped, do you require, does the inspection require it, or does the inspection recommend it? Well, it doesn't really matter if you've clarified that that it's going to get pumped regardless of who's going to pay for it. That should be clarified as well. So again, it's a matter of making sure the words are very clear about what's going to happen and who's going to pay for it.
Perfect. You guys are always so good about reminding us about that. So there's no question, right? And then this is an interesting one, number 15. We're all used to the 10-day inspection period, right? And now they've crossed out 10 and we get to write in however many days we want to do a home inspection,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that's a really good change, because a lot of times it's hard to get an inspector out there, or to get all of the inspectors out there within that 10-day framework. For example, if you're going to have a pool inspection or a radon inspection or chimney inspection, those aren't necessarily easy inspections to get scheduled within that 10-day framework.
Mm-hmm.
And especially during the summer season when it's much busier
Right.
compared to wintertime where it might be a little slower.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's good to know if we can even get somebody out there. Now, I know we're not talking about strong offers, but one of the things we talk about in strong offers is getting with your preferred, get with your buyer, get with your preferred inspector, whoever they choose, and write right into the purchase agreement when the home inspection is going to be. Then there's
I
no
want to
gap.
point out just for a moment, again, we've talked about this a lot, but I'm going to remind agents out there who are using the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement, it is different than GCAR and other forms that we use. In the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement, if a buyer comes back within that window, within that inspection window, whatever it is, and they ask for repairs or consideration as a result of the inspections, the seller does have the right to terminate immediately without cause. I mean, they can just say, no, we're done, you're out. Whereas on GCAR, the GCAR form, for example, that's not the case, and other forms, it's not the case. So be very aware of the language as it regards inspections and what the options are with whatever contract you're using, whichever purchase agreement you're using out there.
Yes, good reminder, Don. All right. And then they've added the word exceptions here. I'm trying to think of an exception on the inspection period that we would write in there. Anybody think of anything? What would you be using that for? I'm not sure.
That's a good question, but I know sometimes we run into issues where there may be investigations regarding ingress, egress with the township, for example, or approvals from the Michigan Department of Transportation as far as driveway aprons and so on, that sort of thing. So there may be some portion of those inspections and investigations which may fall outside the time frame of that 10 days. That might be an example of how that exceptions line could be used.
Yeah, you might also see with the exception line where the buyer states that they're going to pay for the well and septic inspections, except the seller will pay for the pumping of the septic.
Perfect example.
Okay. All right. That's good. Good. Very helpful. All right. Moving on to number 18, property survey. Once again, they took away check and say choose who's going to order that survey and pay for it, or if there's going to be no survey. All right. Number 20. This is on prorations, and they've added for the purposes of calculating prorations, it is presumed that seller owns the property through the day before closing. So that just clarifies who gets the closing day, right? Who's being charged for it.
Correct. Yeah, because before so many times some people may interpret a certain clause to read, well, as of the day of closing, the seller is going to be responsible for prorations. Others may have said, no, the buyer is responsible once they sign off on that day. So you're really negotiating one single day out of 365. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, how much of a penny pincher do you have to be?
I wasn't going to say that. All right.
I will, sorry.
He
Speak
said
my
it.
mind.
Okay. So, all right, so 22 is a big change here, right? For West Michigan Regional, this has always been a part of GCAR, but this is new, the pre-closing walkthrough for the buyer, and they can either reserve it or waive it. I'll read it and then you guys can talk about it. So buyer reserves or waives, choose one, the right to conduct a final walkthrough of the property within 3 days of the scheduled closing date. The purpose of the walkthrough is to determine that the property is in substantially similar condition as of the effective date, any contractually agreed upon items have been fulfilled, and that any included personal property is still located at the property. Buyer shall immediately report to seller any objections to these conditions and buyer's requested corrective action. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thought-
so I think this is finally a good step towards buyer's agents ensuring that the seller has fulfilled all of the obligations. I think so
Mhm.
many times a buyer's agent sometimes forgets to get proof of certain repairs that were supposed to be done. And then after closing, they go, oops, kind of forgot to verify those things. So this
Can I
is a
give
good
you-
way, a good reminder to go through and ensure those things are there, maybe that the washer and dryer weren't inadvertently removed, so that you can address these issues prior to closing, because once you close, it's much harder to go back and enforce someone to perform. So this is just kind of an option for someone just to double check their work to make sure everything has been completed.
Can I give you a really quick story? I hear agents love our stories, so I'll make it really fast. I just had a property that we went to do the walkthrough the day that, well, actually, it's a little bit bigger than that. They had possession. So I'm a buyer's agent. I know that a lot of times buyers give up their rights, but me, when there's a holdover for 21 days, I put $2,000 in escrow. If the house is in great shape, we'll sign off, seller gets it back. I think it's a great idea. So I did this. So the short story is we went over there last week one evening to take possession. And that day I was told by the listing agent, hey, there was a gas leak. Plumbing company was out there. Gas is being turned back on. Everything's good. Okay. Guess what? Everything wasn't good. So that's why you need to inspect. So then we said, well, how come the gas isn't on? Kept calling. Gas company came out, said there were still 2 more leaks. So the seller paid 400. Now they want another 400. Who's paying that? So just a quick example of that walkthrough makes a difference. You want to make sure that what the seller said was working is working and what the seller said was fixed is fixed. So we're still working through that to this day. But I remember I've got $2,000 in escrow should we have to pay for that gas leak. So.
And Kim, you raised an excellent point about what happens at the closing when the buyer becomes the owner of the property, but that seller continues to live in the property for 15 days, 30 days, 60 days. What happens then? Well, this paragraph allowing a walkthrough is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't protect that buyer completely, not by any stretch. You know, a lot can happen in 30 days from closing till that buyer gets possession of the property. And how do you protect your buyer to make sure that the condition of the property will remain the same over the term of that 30 days possession? And that's where we get into discussions about setting aside escrow, as you've done, or we establish some sort of a security deposit and short-term lease agreement. And I know that, Eric, you've had a number of situations like this that maybe you can share something, what happened in those cases.
Yeah, well, a lot of times it comes down to how much risk does a buyer want to assume? And sometimes that's not our position to explain to them, because it gets outside the scope, because all of a sudden now you're looking at a short-term rental agreements. You're looking at the possibility of, one, the lender won't allow a short-term rental agreement of 30 days for lending purposes. Number 2, you're looking at potential insurance needs for that tenant now. That's going to, because you're going to be a landlord as a new buyer. You buy this property, you let someone live in it, you're a landlord. You can't just show up when you want. You got to
Mhm.
follow
Okay.
certain guidelines, but if we don't have it in writing, how do you know what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do?
Right.
So many
I know
times we encourage.
one
What's that?
circumstance we had was somebody, a buyer of a property had gone to closing. And now that buyer wanted to deliver flooring into the garage of the property they perceived to be theirs. Well, it was theirs, but the seller still maintained residency as a tenant and had the rights that any tenant would have. So you can't go over there and install the jungle gym or the dog run or the fences or drop off flooring that you're going to install after you get possession of the property.
Right.
I want to address one other thing here, which is right toward the end, where it says that any objections, the buyer can provide any objections they have regarding corrective action. So here's a situation where sometimes agents perceive, and other agents you will work with, other brokers will perceive that is opening up the contract. That's a phrase that I hear a lot, opening up the contract for negotiation and therefore termination. And that's not the case in this situation. That only applies to paragraph 15, the inspections paragraph, which expressly states that if the buyer asks for repairs, that the seller has the right to kick them to the curb. This paragraph does not have that language in there. So it's possible that they could put this request for corrective action, whatever it might be, and the seller could say, no, I'm not going to do that. And then you've got a different issue, but the seller doesn't have the right to terminate the contract as a result of them
Mm.
supposedly opening up the contract.
So just
Yeah,
to be
that's-
clear, the seller cannot terminate if we ask for things to be fixed in this walkthrough that were supposed to have been fixed or in the condition the home was when we first bought it.
Correct.
Okay.
That's
I mean,
that's from paragraph
unfortunately,
20.
I really wish that they would have drafted this as much stronger language to allow the buyer to terminate if the seller failed to perform what was agreed upon in the purchase agreement.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't. For some reason, this is still left open-ended. It's going to be there's going to be some contentions here in the future with this because a buyer is going to say, well, you're supposed to do this, but we can't force a seller to do something. So then attorneys will have to be brought in and it's just going to get ugly. So we encourage listing agents, make sure your client does what they're supposed to do in that purchase agreement.
And send invoices.
And send
go
invoices and
inspect it.
proof.
Yes.
And sometimes we have to be a little stern with the client because they're under contract and they should be aware of the
Mhm.
consequences of not performing. So it's okay to be straightforward with your client at times.
Mhm. And sometimes, I know we need to move on, is if you're not happy, the best thing sometimes is to not close.
That's
I mean,
correct.
sometimes that's one of your options. So
Until it's corrected.
until it's corrected. So, and get new addendums, get new language, right?
Yep.
Yep.
All right, let's see what comes up next here. Number 33, minor change, right?
Yep.
Just instead of check, say choose. This is interesting where they now are asking whether they're US citizen or resident alien. And I posted a little bit about this Friday. This is kind of a big topic. Probably won't grab it here today, but Don, what's that mean?
I think it's clear what it means.
Right.
Either they're a citizen or a resident alien.
Right.
And if they are not, then there are other laws which apply under, I believe it's FERPTA, right?
Yep. Yep. The
RPA.
tax laws.
And I agree that that's not really a conversation we can get into at this point with this amount of time remaining, but it is something that we'll bring up later in another live stream.
Yeah, I can sum it up real quick here. It just means that as a buyer's agent, that seller may have to put certain tax funds aside in escrow so that your buyer doesn't have to pay those taxes on the home. And that's
Right.
something that if you have a non-US citizen who owns property, you can always call the deal doctor line and we can help you and understand
Right.
what taxes will need to be pulled out in escrow so that your buyer doesn't assume the responsibility of those taxes that are truly the sellers.
So guys, we have 10 minutes left. We just reviewed the purchase agreement We've also got a few changes on the mutual release, the seller disclosure, and the listing agreement. Where would you like to go?
How about listing agreement? I know there's one on paragraph 18 that's
Okay,
Kinda-
I'm gonna pull it up. I'm gonna share my screen. I just had to go get the right form. All right, there you go. This is on the listing agreement. So it looks like pretty standard there. They did the revision date. I like it when the revision date's there. Tell us what's the most current document. We should be using the most current documents in dot loop. Number 9 has a quick change. Instead of saying check, it says choose in paragraph 9. And number 18, Don or Eric, about non-discrimination.
Well, this is an interesting one, and I'm I'm a little flabbergasted by it, frankly, because what they've done is eliminated it as an option to provide what we call buyer love letters. The buyer loves the house because they grew up in the neighborhood. They went to school at the same school. They want their kids to grow up in the same school district, blah, 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 blah. And as long as it is not discriminatory in nature, it's there's always been the question, should we provide it or not? We understand if it's discriminatory, absolutely not, no way. But the board has essentially taken it upon themselves to revise the purchase agreement. So it says, seller directs the broker that letters from the buyer will not be presented with any offer to purchase. This despite the federal court recently finding that it is within the realm of free speech that those can be provided. Is that your understanding, Eric?
I have not read the entire
Oh, okay.
outcome of that, so unfortunately I don't have an answer just yet on that one.
So based on what we have, what we have to work with is the bottom line here. I'm a little surprised that they've taken that position, but I understand it from the standpoint that it is very easy to cross that discrimination line when you are providing these letters, because it may be something so innocent as to say, they go to, they want to go to Holy Spirit school. Well, boom, right there, you've just crossed the line. So I understand them being careful. I'm going to be curious to see if this gets changed back at some point in the future.
Okay.
Or if someone really wanted to perform this, we would just write up an addendum with a letter there. Therefore, it's part of the purchase agreement.
Well, what we're finding is,
But we don't want that.
no, and what we're finding is really a summary of the offer in the email, the dot loop. They're saying it there, right? They're telling the story when they send over the offer. So
Yeah.
some good conversations. I get this question, and maybe we don't know right now, but I do get this question. Does 5-Star allow letters? Now, I know their purchase agreement doesn't right now, but what about other boards? Do we know that answer, or do we have to check?
Well, I'm gonna go to the default position that 5-Star doesn't prohibit anything that is not illegal. And as long as it's legal, it's okay. Now, this particular purchase agreement is saying we're not going to allow it. Again, the question is out there whether or not this has been deemed illegal by the courts. And in fact, it seems to me, in my interpretation of it, that it remains quite legal. So I think it's okay, provided, again, and you have to be really, really cautious that you don't cross the discrimination line in any way, shape, or form if you're going to allow those or to provide those.
Perfect. All right. And then once again, we have the citizenship. We just touched on that a little bit. On item number 27, we just need to ask the question, are you a citizen? Are you a resident alien? And that has to do with FERPTA and the tax laws, right?
Yeah, tax implications for the buyer.
For the buyer, correct. All right, it's 1:25. You want to go to another one?
Sure, let's
Sure.
go to the seller's disclosure form.
There you
This
go.
one. This one.
Got it?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
what's changed here? Looks like, well, this is seller disclosure exemption. Is that the one you're talking about, Don?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's really important to review this very briefly
Okay.
because we get the call a lot. Are my sellers exempt from filling out the seller's disclosure form? Please read this. It's very, very, very clear who is exempt and who is not. If your seller is a landlord who is renting out this property, they are not exempt from filling out a seller's disclosure form. They are still required to do that. If it is a flip and the buyers or the seller says, well, I've never lived in the property, and they scratch it across the front of the exemption form or the seller's disclosure form, that's not an exempt property. So it's really important that agents understand who is exempt, anything to do with a court, a divorce, a guardianship, a conservatorship, excuse me, a transfer due to foreclosure, new construction, never lived in, an estate property. I mean, you can go down the list here and it's very clear who has to, who is exempt and who isn't. And landlords and flippers are not exempt, period.
Period.
They
All
did
right.
answer, they did add the part at the bottom requesting a buyer's acknowledgement that the buyer understands that this seller is exempt from providing a seller's disclosure form, which is, I think, a good idea. So I just want to
All right.
point that out.
All right. And then let's see, let me see what I have here. So that's the purchase agreement. We did that one. Let me go back. We did the seller disclosure. I believe there's just a mutual release. That's seller disclosure. Come on. And how come I'm not getting my other one? There we go. You want to hit this real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So now it's saying the undersigned buyers, sellers, realtors identified in the purchase agreement dated blank concerning the property known as address hereby agree to, instead of cancellation, it says termination now. And then it goes on to say they all agree for themselves, their heirs, personal representatives, and assigns to release and forever discharge each other from any claims, demands, causes of action, damages, debts, or obligations of every kind arising from or by virtue of that agreement, including any and all amendments and supplements. Then they added, providing that the foregoing release shall not apply to any claims of the listing broker pursuant to its existing listing agreement in the event that sellers subsequently sell the property to buyers. That's a lot. Who wants to give us the easy version?
Eric, it's all yours, Eric. Go ahead.
He's going great. And then we removed this other language that said within so many months of the date of this release.
Yeah, so you have to understand that there typically are protections in listing agreements that brokers write in there, that if that seller ends up selling to the same buyer, let's say somewhere down the road, there are protections that they're still going to honor that listing agreement initial protections. It's not going to be wiped away. So they're just reinforcing it that here, provided that the foregoing release shall not apply to any claims of listing broker pursuant to its existing listing agreement in the event the seller subsequently sell property to the buyer. So
as an example, agent goes out and spends $500 on photos or more, and the listing contract gets terminated through a mutual release. This mutual release does not preempt that agent's ability to collect that $500 if that was spelled out in the listing contract. You have to be very careful that that listing contract has to be very specific about that being an expense that could be recouped if it is terminated or released later on. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really hard to take that one to court. Let's scroll back up there for a second. The other thing I think it's important is a reminder here that we have the two-step process in place for terminating a contract. And here's a really good example why. Until this document is fully signed, by both brokers and both parties, buyer and seller. Until this is signed, this is not enforceable. But a buyer may have the unilateral right to terminate a contract, for example, with the well and septic or the inspections or title work and so on. And so they have a unilateral right based on the contract, but just sending this over doesn't actually terminate the contract until they've actually terminated it with an addendum. That's Eric, can you spend a moment with that one?
Yeah, so I think the misconception is that, okay, we want to terminate, we want to deal with our EMD, here's the one form. I think what we need to work on is actually getting a notice of termination that's specific in 5-star documents, so that agents can truly understand that, hey, there is a step 1 notice of termination. It's simply saying buyer hereby terminates the purchase agreement for the following property, dated whatever. Done. That's it, right? I mean, that could be either from a buyer side or the seller side on whoever wants to terminate. Sometimes we don't need the other party to agree to that termination based on the language of the purchase agreement. So we don't care whether the other side signs it or not. It's done. Part 2 is always now, how do we resolve the EMD? And this is what this is really doing. We've already terminated. We're just reinforcing the terminating notice language again, which really isn't needed, but we're doing it anyway. And we're now saying, okay, parties, we want to come to an agreement on who's getting the EMD. Again, if both parties can't agree, one party is going to have to sue the other in order to get that EMD released.
And you will find at times that buyers and sellers will not agree to the disbursement of the EMD. And so therefore it gets hung up and you don't know whether or not that property is actually, or that purchase agreement has actually been terminated. Whereas if you have the separate addendum, it's very clear that the offer has been terminated. So we run a little bit over time, but I hope it's been helpful. Any last thoughts, Kim?
Yes, I do. A couple of really quick thoughts. We are reminding everyone to check your email. Be sure to sign up for Ninja. A lot of information we've been sending out that's coming in May, the week of May 16th. Be sure to sign up for Ninja. And the other thing is, remember, as your broker support team, we have Don and Eric who are amazing, but you have our broker support team, myself, Tracy, Marissa, Doug, and who did I miss? Doug, Tracy, me, Cindy. Yes. So just remember on your who to call list, always think of us as your 411 broker support team. We're going to be information. We're going to help you review contracts. We're going to help you with training. I do a lot of one-on-ones. If you're not understanding something, I will meet you, jump on and Zoom with you. We're your 411, and Don and Eric are going to be more of your 911, answer a question and get you back on the road. So just remember your team, we love this team, but as you can imagine with almost 700 agents, they take a lot of calls. So we are here to help you and to help the deal doctors and make sure that you reach out to us as well.
I'm going to make a quick comment about Ninja. I am pleased and proud to say that I am one of 5-Star's first Ninjas. It was nearly, I think it was like 9 years ago that Greg sent me over to Chicago to go through a Ninja program. And I came back and felt this is one of the best training programs, not just for real estate, but for your life. It helps you establish balance, boundaries, and really gives you a perspective of how to grow your business within your overall life goals. So if you are, whether you're new, rebooting, struggling, very successful, all of it, it's a great program for everyone. And I speak from experience that it's one of the best training programs that I've gone through. I'm going to leave the final mention up to Eric there and let him sign off. So
thanks 5-Star Real Estate Agents for tuning in to another live Deal Doctor live stream with Kim and Don. Till next time, have a great week.
See ya. Bye.